Hello, I am David W. Parker. This is Programming Today I Learned. This is the third episode in our Sapper and Svelte series. Today we're going to be going ahead and setting up some APIs and having a user registration that accesses our API on the Rails app that we've been working on. So let's go ahead and jump right into code. So we're going to be really changing three files here. The routes index. We're going to be creating this new one called source shared APIs, and then one for under webpack config. Also note that I changed the development here. I forgot to mention that in the last video to use letter opener. So this is all new, but it was referenced in the show notes as well as the GitHub repo, but I just didn't happen to mention it in the video. So let's go ahead and see what we changed in our Svelte application. So the first thing, and really the only thing that I've changed within the webpack config, is I've set up a few aliases that I like to use. Mainly I like to use CMP just because components is a really long thing to write. And then I add another for shared, just so I don't have to reference source shared. So there's just a few aliases that I like to use. You can use your own, set up your own, don't use any, whatever. Just some reference for you. So let's take a look at our application real quick. It's the wrong one. Here we go. So it's basically just a form. It uses password and then submit. You can see I have one password on here, but I don't really need to. And that's it. So this is all we're going to build right now. Let's take a look at the code. So I'm going to just throw everything in this index file. Obviously, you may or may not want to do that. You want to throw things in and have it more organized or however you'd like. That's fine. As we progress, we will be doing some of that in certain levels, and we will keep some things really, really fine-grained and modular, and some things not so much. So this is the entire file, and let's just look at the form application itself first. So we have a form, and we're going to say on submit, and then prevent the default, which is not going to actually do the post. And it's going to call a function called handle submit, which we'll look up above momentarily. Also has method of post, and you can see I have no action here. One thing to note is on forms, you'll normally have an action, and that'll reference to a specific API or endpoint. We're not doing that in this Svelte application because this is going to be a static site. You can, within Sapper, have an endpoint that is accessed, and I'll show that at another date. I do that on my site Listen Addict, so that way it works with and without JavaScript. But in this scenario, we're going to go ahead and just have it work with just this handle submit JavaScript. I got a couple divs here, and obviously they're empty at this point, but I'll be filling those in later on with some Tailwind code. I have the first one here as an email, and it's going to take a user and email as the named param. This is just the standard way Rails does things, but you don't have to label it for that, given we're going to be passing it in the API way instead of this way, but I just kind of keep that standard. Make sure you have an area label for the accessibility and a placeholder, and then we're going to bind a function, or excuse me, a variable called email that's defined above. We're going to do the same thing with password here. And it's going to bind a password, and this is a password field. Finally, we're going to have a button. It's going to be type submit. It will be disabled if this submitting value is true. And then this is when we get into the first really real bit of Svelte syntax, with the exception of this binding here, which is if and else statements. So you can see it's pound if, and then some variable, true or false, and show something, and then else is with the colon here, and then the embrace is the end of the if. It's kind of weird syntax at first. I didn't like it at first, but you kind of get used to it, and there's really just not a lot of syntax to Svelte, so in the long grand scheme of things, this is really not that complicated. That's it for the entire form. Now let's go ahead and take a look at where email and password submitting come from, as well as handle submit. So email and password are just variables that they're defined, and they're just undefined at the moment. I'm also defining errors and submitting, as well as another one called success. I'm not using success yet, but we will be in the future. And then I'm going to build an async function called handle submit, which is again called when the form is submitted. So when this is clicked, and this is clicked for the type submit button here, it's going to call this function. And I'm importing from shared APIs, which we'll look at in just a moment. And I'm going to go ahead and set the submitting to true. So at that point, this is going to be saying submitting, and it's going to be disabled as soon as I click the submit button. I'm going to clear any errors if there were any, and then I'm going to call this await function for this post. I'm going to be calling my local server for my Rails application to the endpoint of users, and I'm going to build in the parameter for the body of user with email and password in it. If I get a success back, I'm going to set it to 200. If I check 200, I'll set my success message, and then I'll go ahead and clear out the email and password from the form. If I have any errors, I'll go ahead and display or check that and add them to the errors array. And if there's 404, 500, I will set those as well. And finally, when the entire thing is finished running, I will set submitting to false. Let's go ahead and look at the APIs real quick. So here are the shortcut methods for the send method, which is above, of get, del, because delete is like a reserved word, post, and put. It's going to pass in the method, the path, some data, session if there is any, and a base. So one thing to note is this code was extracted or taken from Svelte's real-world examples. So this is some pretty simple code that they've put up. I've modified it slightly to accommodate a few things like my JWT headers, as well as authorization, which we'll be using later, but not in this particular episode, and as well as this little form data information here. So you could follow along if we're in the backend process. It's going to use the node fetch, which was in our package.json previously, where I had said we're going to add a way to use fetch in the backend. And then otherwise, we're going to use the Windows fetch. We're going to go ahead and set some options as defaults. And we're going to go ahead and set our application type of JSON, take our data and stringify it. If we have a session, we're going to go ahead and set that information. Like I said, we'll be using that in a future episode, but not quite yet. Then we're finally going to go ahead and take and build our path out. If we're in debug mode, we may log out some information. And finally, we're going to call that fetch with that path and any kind of options and data that we have, such as the authorization header and the form data as well, and the body. We'll go ahead and await that response, log out any response we want, and then return that response in JSON, which is where we're getting those response and JSON back in the index file. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this ends up doing. So we have this here, and if I go ahead and do one that I already know exists, and I click submit, it's going to go ahead and submit, and then it has the fail of 401. You can see email has already been taken. Now, obviously, I'm not displaying that out right now. I can, and I will in a future episode. But if I wanted to go ahead and display the errors down here, as well as the success message, I could. If I go back over to my letter opener, I can see I don't have any new letter openers from right now. But let's go ahead and do one that doesn't exist yet. So this time it cleared it out because it was successful. We could take a look, and here's the message that it got back, which is please confirm your email address. Go ahead and refresh our letter opener here, and you could see here's the new one. You can see it's to test 123, which is who I just filled out, and you can confirm your account email through the link below. This doesn't work yet, so I'm not going to go ahead and click it because it'll just error out. But this is a nice, very simple form that we got started on. And this is a very, very simple way to begin interacting between our Rails API and our Svelte frontend application. We're going to continue to build on this. We'll be adding the confirmation. We will be adding Tailwind, making it look a little prettier, And then we'll start in with signing in, signing out, and then starting to build actual functionality into what we would do with a real application. So that's it for this episode. I hope you guys liked it, and throw a like on there, notifications and all that kind of stuff. Subscribe. Appreciate it. See you guys next time.